The sun hung mercilessly over the dusty little frontier town, its heat baking the crowd gathered in the square. Men with tobacco-stained teeth leaned on wooden railings, their voices rising in eager shouts as the auctioneer rattled off numbers. A woman stood on the block, her wrists bound, her hair tangled, her eyes wide with shame and fear. She had once been free to walk where she pleased, to laugh, to dream, but all of that had been stolen. Now she was reduced to nothing more than a commodity, a trembling figure under the gaze of men who would barter for her body like they would cattle or horses. The auctioneer's hammer hovered in the air, his oily voice booming. Fine young woman, strong, obedient, a prize for any man. Who'll start the bidding? The crowd roared. Prices flew. She closed her eyes, wishing herself anywhere else, wishing for the earth to swallow her whole dot, and then it happened. From the edge of the crowd, a figure moved, a tall Apache warrior, his dark eyes fixed on her. Shackles had once bound his wrists, too. He knew too well the humiliation of chains, the crushing weight of being displayed like an object. Something inside him, raw and unyielding, snapped at the sight of her tears. With a sudden explosive motion, he lunged forward. The crowd gasped as he knocked aside two men, seized the reins of a nearby horse, and vaulted onto its back. Before the auctioneer could react, before the hammer could strike, the warrior grabbed the woman, pulling her from the block with a strength born of fury. She screamed, at first terrified, unsure if this savage was her rescuer or captor. But the moment his arm locked around her, she felt a strange safety in its firmness. "Hold on," he growled. His voice low, urgent. The horse surged forward, hooves pounding against the dirt as the warrior drove it through the stunned crowd. Shouts erupted, rifles were raised, and shots cracked through the air. Dust and smoke rose in chaos as they thundered down the main street, leaving the auction block behind in an explosion of defiance. Men scrambled to their saddles, giving chase. The posse would not let such an insult stand, a white woman stolen by an Apache in broad daylight. It was madness. It was rebellion, but to him, it was justice. They raced out of town, wind tearing at their clothes, bullets whistling past. She clung to him, trembling, her heart beating in wild rhythm against his chest. The fear of capture was real, but deeper still was her desperate plea that he would not let go. "Please, just hold me tight," she whispered, barely audible above the thunder of hooves, and he did. His grip was unyielding, not just from necessity, but from something he could not yet name. Hours later, when the sound of pursuit had faded into the distance, he slowed the horse to a trot. They entered the wilderness untamed land of jagged rocks, whispering pines, and endless sky. He guided the horse into the shelter of a canyon, hidden from open trails. She slid down shakily, her legs too weak to hold her. Her wrists were raw where the ropes had bitten. He dismounted in silence, cutting her bonds with a knife. She looked up at him then, really seeing him for the first time. His face was hard, lined with struggle, but his eyes carried a sorrow deeper than she could fathom. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why risk everything for me?" He paused, his jaw tightening as he searched for words. Finally he said, "Because I know what it means to be chained. No one deserves that fate." She stared at him, her heart heavy with gratitude, confusion, and something more. He was a stranger, an outcast, a man the world called savage. Yet, in one reckless act of courage, he had given her hope where none had been. The canyon grew darker as twilight bled across the sky. The air was cooler now, scented with pine and damp earth, and the stillness pressed down heavy after the chaos of the town. The Apache warrior led the horse deeper into the shadows, searching for a place where firelight wouldn't betray them. The woman followed, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Her bare feet stumbled over rocks, but she bit back her cries. She would not appear weak in front of him, though every muscle screamed. She still didn't even know his name. At last, he stopped near a cluster of boulders where the canyon wall curved inward, creating a natural shelter. He lifted his hand, signaling silence. She froze, her breath quick and shallow. They waited in the hush, listening for the distant echo of hooves. Nothing. Only the call of a night bird and the sigh of wind against stone. He turned to her then. His movements were deliberate, controlled, as he gathered brush and kindling. With 2 flint stones, he coaxed a flame to life, small and steady. She sank to the ground near the fire, arms wrapped around herself. Only now did the weight of what had happened crash down on her, the auction block, the gunfire, the wild escape. Her throat tightened. She wanted to weep, to collapse, but the man sitting across from her was a reminder that she couldn't give in to despair. Not yet. He studied her quietly, his eyes reflecting the flicker of firelight. She shifted under his gaze. "You saved me," she whispered, finally breaking the silence. He shook his head. "I only stopped them from taking what was not theirs to sell." "But you don't even know me," she said. Her voice cracked. "Why risk your life?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because once, no one stopped them when they took me." Her breath caught. She had guessed as much, but hearing the truth laid bare sent a shiver through her. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice soft with sympathy. For a long moment they said nothing more. The fire crackled, shadows danced across the canyon walls, and above them stars began to scatter across the black sky. At last, exhaustion dragged her eyelids down. She swayed where she sat, then startled when she felt a weight brush against her. He had draped his blanket across her shoulders, his hand firm but gentle as he tucked it around her. She met his eyes. I don't even know your name." "Dakota," he said simply. "Dakota," she repeated softly, tasting the strength of it. "I'm Clara." A silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't the sharp silence of strangers. It was heavy with something unspoken, fragile but growing. The fire's warmth seeped into her bones, but fear still gnawed at her. "They'll come after us," she whispered. "They'll never stop." His gaze didn't waver. "Then we keep moving. We stay ahead. I know these lands better than they do." Her eyes welled with tears she could no longer hold back. She pressed her hands to her face, the sobs shaking her shoulders. "I was so afraid. On that block. I thought it was the end. And then you," she broke off, her voice strangled with emotion. Before she could stop herself, she leaned forward, clutching at him. He stiffened for a moment, startled, but when her voice broke against his chest, "Please, just hold me tight." His arms wrapped around her, strong and steady. He held her close, as if anchoring her against the storm that still raged outside. She buried her face in the rough fabric of his shirt, breathing in the scent of smoke and leather. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Dakota closed his eyes. He hadn't expected this, her trust, her fragility pressed against his heart. He had sworn never to let himself grow attached again. Too much loss, too much betrayal. But as he held her trembling form, he knew this was different. She was not a burden. She was a choice. The night stretched long, filled with distant howls and rustling leaves, but within the circle of his arms, Clara found rest. And Dakota, watching the fire burn low, realized the fight ahead was no longer only for survival. It was for her, and maybe for them both. As the shadows of the canyon stretched long, the two fugitives knew their journey was only beginning. The posse would come. The wilderness would test them. And their hearts tangled now in escape, and fear would be forced to reckon with something neither of them had expected: freedom, and perhaps something stronger than freedom. Morning came quietly, the canyon still cloaked in shadows as the first rays of sunlight spilled over the cliffs. Clara stirred beneath the blanket, her cheek resting against the hard earth. For one blissful moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories returned: the auction block, the escape, Dakota's strong arms holding her through the night. She blinked and found him crouched by the fire pit, stamping out the last embers. His movements were silent, precise, like a man who lived always ready to flee. "You should eat," he said simply, offering her a strip of dried meat from a small leather pouch. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't eaten since the day before, and though the meat was tough and unfamiliar, she forced herself to chew. "Thank you," she whispered. Dakota only nodded, but his eyes studied the horizon. The stillness of the canyon no longer seemed safe. It felt like a trap waiting to close. "Are they still looking for us?" Clara asked, her voice hesitant. He met her gaze, his expression grim. "Yes. Men do not forgive humiliation. Not when it is given in front of a crowd." Clara shivered. The memory of angry faces, raised rifles, and shouts still rang in her mind. "Then we should keep moving?" Dakota's lips curved into the faintest ghost of a smile. "You are learning quickly." He saddled the horse with practiced hands, then helped her mount before swinging up behind her. Once again his arm came around her waist, steady and firm. And despite the fear clawing inside her, she leaned into him. They rode hard, weaving through ridges and scrubland, crossing a shallow river to mask their trail. The land stretched wide, an unforgiving endless sky above, thornbrush and sage below. Every sound made Clara flinch: the distant cry of a hawk, the sudden snap of a branch beneath the horse's hooves. By midday, the sun blazed overhead, forcing them to seek shelter beneath a rocky outcrop. Clara wiped sweat from her brow, her dress clinging to her skin. Dakota crouched low, pressing his ear to the ground. "What is it?" she asked nervously. "Hooves," he said. His voice was flat, certain. Her heart lurched. "They've found us?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But they are close. Too close." The sound grew clearer. Men on horseback, their shouts carried faintly on the wind. Clara's breath came quick, shallow. They would catch her, drag her back, punish her for running. Worse, they would punish him for daring to take her. Fear surged in her chest, and before she could stop herself, she grabbed his arm. "Dakota, please don't let them take me back. I'd rather die." His dark eyes met hers, steady as stone. "They will not take you. Not while I breathe." The promise in his voice steadied her trembling heart. She nodded, clinging tighter to him as they prepared to move. With swift efficiency, Dakota led the horse up a narrow game trail hidden among the rocks. They climbed higher, every step a test of balance. Clara's pulse hammered, her hands gripping the saddle until her knuckles ached. Then came the voices, louder now, echoing off the canyon walls. The posse had split, some circling below, others pushing higher. Rifles glinted in the sun. Dakota urged the horse faster, but the trail narrowed, forcing them into single file along a ledge no wider than a wagon wheel. Clara dared a glance down. The drop was sheer, her stomach lurching at the dizzying depth. A gunshot cracked. Stone shattered near her hand, spraying dust and gravel. She screamed, ducking instinctively, but Dakota's arm tightened around her. "Hold on," he barked, spurring the horse forward. They tore across the ledge, bullets whining past. Men shouted behind them, their curses filling the air. Another shot rang out, grazing the canyon wall just above Dakota's head, but then silence. The trail curved sharply, leading into a narrow cleft hidden from view. Dakota guided the horse into the shadows, pulling Clara with him. They pressed close against the rock, breathless, listening as the posse thundered past above, unaware of the path below. Clara clutched his arm, her body trembling with relief. "I thought we were finished," she gasped. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning every angle. At last he looked down at her, his hand brushing hers where it clung to him. "You must never give up so easily," he said softly. "The land gives us many ways to live. We only have to see them." Tears burned her eyes, not of fear this time, but of something deeper: gratitude, trust, perhaps even the first fragile threads of love. She pressed closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Then don't let me go, Dakota. Not now. Not ever." His jaw tightened as though her words touched something dangerous inside him. But when his arm closed around her again, she knew his answer, even without the words. The wilderness stretched ahead, filled with danger. Yet in that hidden cleft of stone, Clara felt for the first time not like a prisoner, running from chains, but like a woman running toward freedom. By late afternoon, the relentless sun softened, casting long shadows across the scrubland. Clara and Dakota had managed to stay hidden after slipping past the posse, but exhaustion weighed heavy. The horse stumbled from fatigue, its flanks heaving with each breath. Dakota finally slowed their pace and guided them toward a small stream winding between cottonwoods. The sound of trickling water was a balm to Clara's parched throat. She slid down awkwardly, nearly collapsing as her legs buckled from hours in the saddle. Dakota caught her arm before she could fall. "Easy," he murmured. His touch was steady, grounding, and she looked up at him with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, but his eyes kept scanning the horizon. "We cannot linger long." Still, Clara sank to her knees at the water's edge, cupping her hands to drink. The cold water soothed her cracked lips and raw throat. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel human again, not property, not prey, just a woman alive under an open sky. Dakota refilled a leather pouch and offered it to her. Then, with quick hands, he checked the horse's hooves. Muttering low words in Apache that Clara didn't understand but felt were meant to soothe the animal. It was then the rustle. Came a sudden movement in the brush. Dakota straightened instantly, knife drawn. Clara's heart leapt to her throat. Out of the trees stepped a man, dusty, bearded, with wary eyes. He raised his hand slowly. "Easy there? Ain't looking for trouble." Dakota didn't lower the blade. "Who are you?" "Name's Dawson," the man said, voice rough. "Been trapping these parts. Saw smoke last night. Heard shots this morning. Thought maybe someone needed help." His gaze flicked to Clara, lingering a moment too long before snapping back to Ko. Clara shivered. Something in his eyes unsettled her. "We don't need help," Dakota said firmly. Dawson scratched his jaw. "That so? Funny thing, though I passed a posse not far back. Seemed mighty interested in finding a certain Apache and a runaway woman. Lot of coin offered for their return." Clara froze. Dakota's grip on the knife tightened. "And what do you want, trapper?" Dawson's smile was thin, sharp. "Man's gotta eat. Coin spends better than pelts." Clara's breath caught. Betrayal hung heavy in the air, not from Dakota, but from the stranger who had stumbled upon their fragile sanctuary. Dakota shifted subtly, placing himself between Clara and Dawson. "Leave," he ordered. "Now," the trapper's eyes narrowed. "Or what? You'll gut me like a deer?" "Might be I don't need to take you myself. Might be I just need to tell them where to look." Clara's heart pounded. She had never seen Dakota so still, so dangerous. The air around him vibrated with controlled fury. "You'll tell no one," Dakota said, voice low as a growl. For a moment, silence stretched tight as a bowstring. Then Dawson spat in the dirt. "Savage dog," he muttered. "You won't last long." He backed away slowly, hands raised, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Clara sagged against a rock, trembling. "Dakota, what if he tells them? What if he leads them straight to us?" "He will," Dakota said bluntly. Men like him always choose coin over honor. Fear coiled in Clara's stomach. Then what do we do? Dakota crouched before her, his eyes fierce, unwavering. We move. Tonight, we take the mountain trails. They are hard, but no posse will follow us there. Her throat tightened. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and cruel. Could she survive such a climb? Dakota seemed to read the doubt in her face. His hand reached out, brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. Clara, you asked me to hold you tight. I will not let go. Not in the mountains, not in the storm, not in the fire. Tears stung her eyes. In that moment, she believed him. As dusk settled, they mounted again, the fading sun painting the land in hues of fire and blood. Behind them, shadows thickened. Somewhere Dawson would be whispering to the men who hunted them. Ahead lay the mountains cold, merciless, and perhaps their only hope. Together, they rode into the gathering dark, hearts bound not only by fear, but by something far more dangerous. By trust. The mountains rose before them like ancient guardians, their jagged peaks catching the last fire of the setting sun. To Clara, they seemed both beautiful and terrifying, a wilderness vast enough to swallow them whole. Dakota urged the weary horse onto a narrow trail winding upward, its hooves clattering against stone. The climb was slow, grueling. Night had fallen fully, the stars bright above, but the shadows under the cliffs were thick and alive with unknown sounds. Clara clung to the saddle horn, every jolt rattling her sore body. At last, when the moon was high, Dakota guided them into a sheltered hollow beneath a ledge of rock. He dismounted first, then reached up to lift Clara down. His hands were steady, but his eyes flicked constantly to the trail they had left behind. Will they follow? She asked softly. Dakota's jaw tightened. Not far. The mountains test men. Few have the heart to endure them. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders as a sharp wind whipped through the hollow. It cut straight to the bone. Shivering, she knelt close to the fire Dakota built with dried pine needles and brittle branches. The flames flickered weakly in the thin air, but the warmth was a blessing. Dakota crouched beside her, his face drawn in concentration. You must eat, he said, offering her a strip of dried venison. Her stomach rebelled at the thought, but she forced herself to chew. He watched her carefully, as if weighing her strength. Finally, he nodded, satisfied. You endure better than most, he said. A shaky smile tugged at her lips. That's not what my legs think. For the first time since she had met him, the corner of his mouth twitched in the faintest smile. The warmth of it startled her more than the fire did, but their moment of quiet was broken when a sound echoed through the canyon below. Voices, faint but unmistakable. Clara stiffened. They're here. Dakota rose instantly, the firelight flashing against the knife in his hand. He moved to the edge of the hollow, listening. After a long moment, he returned, his face grim. They are climbing. Clara's heart pounded. Then we're trapped. His dark eyes fixed on hers. No, not trapped, tested. Before she could speak, he seized the fire, scattering the embers into the dirt until darkness swallowed them. The night pressed close, the cold sharper now, but he took her hand and guided her through a hidden crevice in the rock wall. The passage was narrow, forcing them to squeeze through, scraping their shoulders on stone. On the other side, the land dropped into a high meadow bathed in moonlight. The grass swayed silver, and a stream whispered at its center. It was breathtaking, wild, untouched, but Clara hardly noticed, fear still thrumming in her veins. Dakota led her down the slope, then pulled her close, lowering his voice to a whisper. We must move quietly. Sound carries in these peaks. One mistake, and they will hear us. Her hand tightened in his. I'll follow you. They crept through the meadow, every shadow a threat, every gust of wind a possible whisper of pursuit. Clara's heart raced, but each time her steps faltered. Dakota steadied her with a hand at her back. At last, they reached a thicket of spruce trees, dense enough to hide them. Dakota motioned for her to crouch. They sank into the darkness, breathing shallowly. From somewhere above, the echo of voices drifted faintly, but then faded, lost to the vastness of the mountains. Clara leaned against him, trembling from cold and nerves. He shifted, wrapping the blanket around them both. His arm settled firmly around her shoulders, drawing her close to his warmth. "Dakota," she whispered, her voice breaking, "how much farther must we run?" He looked out over the meadow, the moonlight silvering the hard lines of his face. "Until there is nowhere left to run. Then we make our stand." Her breath caught, but she nodded, finding strength in the certainty of his voice. She pressed closer, resting her cheek against his chest, hearing the steady thud of his heart. In the silence of the mountains, with danger lurking in every shadow, she felt the truth of her own heart. It wasn't only fear that drove her now. It was something deeper, something fierce, something that tied her to this man who had risked everything for her freedom. As the night stretched on, Clara whispered the words that had become her only plea. "Please, just hold me tight." And Dakota, staring into the dark where enemies prowled unseen, tightened his hold. Not just for the night, but for as long as breath remained in him. The mountains awoke with a cold, gray dawn. Mist coiled through the trees, clinging to the earth like a veil. Clara stirred beneath the blanket, her body stiff from the rocky ground. For a brief heartbeat, she imagined safety, that the night's terrors had been only dreams. But when she opened her eyes, she found Dakota already on his feet, scanning the ridge above with the silent intensity of a hawk. Her chest tightened. He looked carved from the stone itself, a man born of wilderness, sharp and unyielding. "They're close," he said without turning. Clara scrambled upright, fear tightening her throat. "How do you know?" Dakota tilted his head. "The crows. They do not circle without reason. Something moves below." Her pulse thundered. "Then we should go." He nodded once, quick and firm, and began leading her along a narrow deer path climbing higher into the pines. The air thinned, sharp with the scent of resin and frost. Their breath misted as they climbed, every step a strain on weary muscles. Hours passed. Clara's legs shook, but she pushed forward, clinging to Dakota's hand each time the trail narrowed over dizzying cliffs. He was her strength, now her guide, her anchor. They reached a ledge overlooking a gorge when the first gunshot cracked. Clara screamed, the bullet splintering rock a breath from her shoulder. Dakota shoved her down, shielding her with his body. Echoes rolled through the mountains as more shots rang out. Voices followed hard, angry, closing fast. "They found us." Clara gasped, terror surging. Dakota's eyes burned with determination. "Stay low." He pulled her behind a boulder, then rose to return fire with the old revolver he had taken from one of the guards back at the auction. His movements were swift, efficient, each shot measured, deliberate. The posse answered with a storm of bullets. Dust and stones sprayed around them. Clara covered her head, trembling, but when she dared a glance at him, he stood tall against the storm, his presence a shield stronger than stone. Then came the scream of a horse and the tumble of falling rock. One of the pursuers had been hit, plunging down the slope. But there were more, too many. Dakota fired again, but as he stepped from cover, a rifle cracked. The sound tore through Clara's soul. Dakota staggered, his body twisting as the bullet struck his shoulder. His revolver clattered to the ground. He fell hard to one knee, blood soaking through the rough fabric of his shirt. "No!" Clara cried, rushing to him. Her hands pressed desperately against the wound, hot blood spilling between her fingers. "Dakota, please, don't leave me." His breath came harsh, but his eyes locked on hers, fierce even in pain. Clara, listen to me. You must run. Tears blurred her vision. I won't. Not without you. Bullets ricocheted off stone around them. The posse was closing in, their shouts echoing. Clara's mind screamed with panic, but her heart clung to him with unyielding force. She would not leave. She could not. Dakota groaned, trying to rise despite the blood soaking his side. Clara braced under his arm, helping him stand. Lean on me, she whispered through clenched teeth. We can still make it. He shook his head, grimacing in pain. You'll die if you stay. Then I'll die with you, she said fiercely, her voice breaking. But I won't go back. I won't leave you. For a heartbeat, his expression softened something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Then he nodded, accepting what could not be changed. Together, they stumbled from cover, ducking low as another volley shattered the rocks above. Clara half dragged him, half carried, her body burning with desperation. At the edge of the gorge, Dakota pointed with his free hand to a narrow cleft in the stone, almost invisible in the shadows. There, he rasped. Hide there. It may save us. Clara guided him inside, pressing close in the darkness as gunfire raged outside. Her hands trembled as she tore a strip from her dress, binding it tightly against his wound. Stay with me, she whispered, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. Please, Dakota. Just hold on. His hand rose weakly, brushing her cheek. I promised I would not let go, he murmured. And though the battle still raged beyond their hiding place, though danger pressed close as a noose, Clara clung to that promise as if it were the only light left in the world. The silence after the gunfire felt heavier than the bullets themselves. In the cleft of the gorge, Clara pressed her ear to the stone, her body taut with fear. The posse's shouts drifted through the trees, searching, hunting. Every snap of a twig made her heart leap. Beside her, Dakota slumped against the rock wall, his face pale beneath the bronze of his skin. Sweat gleamed on his brow, his breathing shallow. Clara's makeshift bandage was already soaked through. The sight of so much blood made her stomach twist. You're losing too much, she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know how to stop it. Dakota's eyes flickered open. Even through the haze of pain, his gaze found hers. You're stronger than you think, Clara. You must believe it. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream that she wasn't strong, that she had been sold like livestock, powerless, voiceless. But here, in the mountains, with no one else to turn to. The truth struck her hard. She was all he had. The thought steadied her trembling hands. Clara pressed harder on the wound, whispering, I'll keep you alive. I swear it. The voices outside drew closer. Check the gorge. One of the men barked. Clara's blood turned to ice. They would find them. It was only a matter of time. Dakota stirred, his hand fumbling for the revolver, but his strength failed. Clara caught his hand, pressing it back to his chest. No, she said firmly. You've fought enough. Now it's my turn. He studied her with eyes that still burned fiercely, even as his body betrayed him. You would risk? Yes, she cut in, her jaw set. For you, just as you did for me. Before fear could weaken her, she slipped from the crevice, crawling on her hands and knees toward the sound of the voices. Every nerve screamed with terror, but something fiercer burned beneath it, determination. She reached a ridge above the gorge. From there, she spotted two men moving carefully through the pines, rifles ready. They were close, too close. Her hand shook as she lifted Dakota's revolver. It felt impossibly heavy, cold metal biting into her palms. She had never fired a gun. Her mind screamed, you'll miss, you'll die. But then she thought of Dakota bleeding in the shadows. Depending on her, Clara drew a breath, steadied her hands, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked, echoing through the gorge. One man cried out, spinning to the ground, clutching his leg. The other dove for cover, shouting curses. Clara ducked back, heart pounding. She had done it, she had fired. She didn't know if she could do it again. The second man's footsteps thundered closer. Clara gripped the revolver with both hands, her body trembling. At the last moment, before he crested the ridge, she fired again. The bullet struck the tree beside him, splintering bark. He stumbled back, swearing, then fled down the slope, dragging his wounded companion with him. Clara sagged against the rock, shaking violently, the revolver slipping from her grasp. She wanted to collapse, to weep until the world dissolved, but there was no time. She scrambled back into the crevice. Takota's eyes opened as she entered, his lips parting in faint surprise. "You? Fired?" Clara nodded, sinking beside him. "I ran them off. They'll come back with more, but for now, we're safe." A faint smile curved his lips. "You are braver than you know." Her tears spilled then, hot and unrestrained. She clutched his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified. But I couldn't let them take you. Not after everything." His thumb brushed weakly against her skin, a fragile gesture that meant everything. "You saved us, Clara. You saved me." Outside, the forest fell quiet again, but the silence carried no peace. Clara knew the danger was far from over. Yet in that small, hidden cleft, as she held onto Takota's hand, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting back. The gorge seemed to hold its breath long after the echoes of Clara's gunshots faded. She sat with her back against the stone, Takota's weight heavy against her shoulder. His body was warm but weakening, every labored breath a reminder of how little time they had. When dawn broke, its light revealed the crimson stains on her torn dress. The way his shirt clung wet to his shoulder. The blood had slowed but not stopped. He could not stay hidden in the cleft if fever set in. It would claim him before bullets ever could. Clara's heart pounded with the choice before her. Wait and risk discovery, or move and risk collapse. Takota stirred, opening his eyes to slits. "We must go," he whispered, voice rough as gravel. "They will return." Clara brushed damp hair from his brow. "You can't even stand." His jaw tightened. "Then leave me." "You have a chance." She gripped his face in both hands, forcing his gaze to hers. "Don't you dare say that again." "I will not leave you." For a moment, the fierceness in her voice silenced him. Then, faintly, a flicker of something softened in his eyes' trust. "Surrender." Clara pushed to her feet, looping his good arm over her shoulders. He was taller, heavier, but she dug deep into a strength she hadn't known existed. Slowly, inch by inch, she half carried him out of the cleft. The forest spread wide before them, pines reaching high into the pale sky, undergrowth thick with ferns and thorns. The path ahead was no path at all, only wilderness. Each step was a battle. Clara's muscles screamed as Takota leaned heavily against her, his breath ragged. They moved in silence, broken only by the crunch of pine needles beneath their feet and the distant caw of crows circling overhead. Once, a twig snapped close by, and Clara froze. Takota's hand pressed weakly against her arm. "Dear," he murmured. She let out a shaky breath, but the reminder struck her hard. Every noise could mean life or death. By midday, they reached a stream trickling through the rocks. Clara eased Takota down beside it, her arms trembling from the effort. She knelt, cupping water in her hands to bring to his lips. He drank greedily, though the motion seemed to cost him. "I have to clean the wound," she whispered. The thought of it terrified her, but leaving it dirty was worse. She tore another strip from her dress, soaking it in the cold stream, then gently pressed it against his shoulder. He hissed in pain but did not pull away. "Your hands." "Are steady," he rasped, Clara's throat tightened. Only because they have to be. She worked carefully, washing away the dried blood, binding the wound as best she could. When she finished, her fingers lingered at his skin, rough from battle, yet warm. We'll keep moving. There has to be somewhere safe higher up. Dakota studied her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through the pain. You've become my strength. The words struck deeper than any bullet. She bowed her head, hiding the tears that stung her eyes. No, I'm just trying not to lose you. By evening, the trees thickened into a dark canopy, and the land rose steeply into jagged slopes. The climb nearly broke her, but Clara pressed forward, guiding Dakota step by step. Whispering encouragement when his body faltered. At last, they reached a hollow beneath a rocky overhang. It was no home, but it offered shelter from the night. Clara lowered him gently, covering him with the blanket. The moment she released his weight, her arms throbbed with exhaustion. She sat beside him, brushing her fingers across his hair. His eyes were closed, but his breathing steadied as though her presence anchored him. The forest grew quiet around them, dusk painting the sky in bruised shades of purple. Clara kept her gaze fixed outward, listening for footsteps, ready to reach for the revolver if needed. For the first time, she realized something startling. She no longer felt like prey. Fear still gnawed at her, but courage burned stronger. She had carried him through the wilderness, and she would keep carrying him, until safety or until she had nothing left to give. Clara leaned close, whispering against his ear. Rest now. I'll keep watch. As long as I breathe, I won't let them take you. And though danger pressed close in the night, her vow rang steady and true, stronger than the mountains themselves. The night passed in restless silence, broken only by the rustle of animals in the underbrush and the distant cry of wolves. Clara barely closed her eyes. Every time Dakota stirred or groaned in his sleep, her heart jumped. She checked the bandage again and again, praying the bleeding would not return. By dawn, pale light seeped through the trees. Clara rose stiffly, revolver clutched tight, scanning the forest with wary eyes. Dakota still slept, his breathing shallow but steady. She dared not move far if she left his side, even for water. What if the posse came? Her answer came sooner than she feared. The crunch of footsteps drifted through the pines. Clara froze. Her pulse hammered, blood roaring in her ears. Whoever it was moved carefully, not the wild stumble of an animal but deliberate. Human steps. She crouched low, revolver raised, heart screaming with terror and determination. A figure emerged from the mist. It wasn't one of the posse. This man was older, his beard streaked with gray, his clothes rough with the wear of the mountains. A rifle rested easy in his hand, as if it were an extension of his arm. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, fell first on Clara, then shifted past her toward Dakota's still form beneath the overhang. The man's brows lifted. "Well now," he drawled in a gravelly voice. "Didn't expect to find company in these parts." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stay back," she warned, her voice breaking. The stranger stopped, raising one hand in mock surrender. "Easy, girl. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be on the ground. I've lived too long up here to go spooking around. Just thought I'd see what fool wandered into the high trails." Clara's throat was dry, but she held the revolver steady. "Who are you?" "Name's Elijah Boone, trapper by trade." His eyes flicked again to Dakota. "And unless I miss my guess, your Apache friend there's in a bad way." Her heart lurched. "He's not your concern." Elijah scratched his beard. "Maybe not, but I know a wound that needs tending when I see one. Fever'll set in if you keep to strips of cloth in creek water." Clara faltered. The man's words hit the truth square. She had done all she could, but it wasn't enough. Dakota's life was slipping like sand through her fingers, and she knew it. Yet, What if Elijah was working with the posse? What if this was a trick? Dakota stirred weakly, his eyes opening. He studied Elijah for a long, tense moment before rasping, "Boone." The trapper tilted his head. "So you remember me?" Clara blinked, confused. "You know him?" Dakota coughed, wincing. "Once. He traded with my people. Long ago." Elijah's expression softened, just a fraction. "That was before the soldiers drove us off these lands. Before I got tired of men killing men and took to the mountains. I ain't part of your fight, son. But I can help, if you'll let me." Clara's heart twisted. She wanted to trust him, needed to, but fear coiled tight. Her gaze darted to Dakota, silently begging for his judgment. Dakota closed his eyes, whispering, "We have no choice. Let him help." Clara lowered the revolver slightly, though her hands still trembled. "If you betray us," Elijah chuckled, a dry, weary sound. "Girl, if I meant betrayal, I wouldn't be standing here jawing with you." He slung his rifle over his shoulder, then knelt by Dakota with a careful, practiced hand. "Now, let's see if I can keep him alive long enough to prove I ain't your enemy." Clara hovered close, mistrust warring with desperate hope. As Elijah unwrapped her makeshift bandages and set about cleaning the wound with skill she hadn't expected, one thought burned through her mind. For the first time, someone besides her held Dakota's life in their hands, and that terrified her more than the guns of the posse ever had. Elijah worked with the quiet efficiency of a man who had stitched more than one wound in the wilderness. He boiled strips of linen in his kettle, pressed herbs into Dakota's shoulder, and wrapped it tight. Clara hovered, her hands twisting, her heart leaping at every pained groan Dakota gave. "He'll live," Elijah muttered at last, wiping his hands on a rag. "If fever don't take him. He's strong, though. Stronger than most men I've patched." Clara's knees buckled with relief, and she sank beside Dakota, clutching his hand. His skin was still hot, but the bleeding had slowed. She whispered softly, "You're safe now. Just hold on." Elijah crouched back on his heels, studying her. "You're a stubborn little thing, aren't you? Most would have run off and saved themselves." Clara lifted her chin. "I told him I wouldn't leave. And I won't." The trapper gave a grunt that might have been approval. But before another word could pass between them, a sound carried on the morning air, the distant baying of hounds. Clara's blood froze. Elijah's expression hardened. "They've brought dogs." Dakota stirred, his voice a rasp. "The posse." The baying grew louder, echoing off the cliffs. Clara felt the ground tilt beneath her. "They're close, what do we do?" Elijah's jaw tightened as he rose to his feet. "We fight. Ain't no outrunning dogs with him wounded. But up here," he gestured to the overhang, "we can bottleneck 'em. Hold 'em off." Fear clawed at Clara's chest, but she steadied herself. She had already fired a gun, already fought for him once. She would do it again. Elijah handed her a small pistol from his pack. "Not much, but it'll shoot straight. You stand your ground, girl. Don't think. Just fire." Her fingers curled around the weapon, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might split. She crouched by Dakota, brushing his hair back. "Stay with me, no matter what happens." His eyes opened faintly, locking on hers. "Clara, if this is the end—" "No," she whispered fiercely, pressing her lips to his forehead. "It's not the end. Not for us." The hounds broke the tree line first, barking furiously, straining at their leashes as men in dust-covered coats surged into view. The posse had doubled, at least 10 men now, rifles gleaming in the pale light. "There!" one shouted. "The Apaches hold up with the girl." Gunfire cracked. Bark exploded from the trees around them. Elijah answered with his rifle. The shot ringing true, one of the men dropped, his scream echoing down the gorge. Clara flinched but forced herself to raise the pistol. Her shot went wide, sparking off stone. But the next came closer, forcing one of the men to duck behind a tree. The firefight blazed. Smoke choked the air, bullets whined past. Elijah moved like a man born to battle, firing, reloading, firing again. His jaw clenched tight. Clara crouched low, firing when she dared. Her hands trembling but her resolve iron. Each time she thought fear would break her. She felt Dakota's gaze on her steady, proud, even in his weakness, and she found the courage to squeeze the trigger again. Then a rifle cracked, louder than the rest. Elijah staggered, blood blooming across his chest. He dropped to one knee, firing one last shot before collapsing. No. Clara screamed, rushing toward him, but he waved her off, coughing. Don't waste it, fight. The posse surged forward, emboldened. Clara scrambled back, pistol empty, heart thundering. She dropped behind the stone, despair clawing at her throat. Dakota's voice cut through the chaos, rough but commanding. Clara, the reins. She blinked, confused, then followed his gaze. Their horse, tied under the overhang, pawed nervously at the ground. Understanding crashed over her. She ran to it, untying the rope with frantic hands. Bullets whined past, one grazing her arm, but she barely felt it. She guided the horse to Dakota, helping him into the saddle with strength born of desperation. Climb up. He rasped. Clara scrambled behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, clutching the reins tight. Hold on to me, she whispered. Dakota's bloodied hand covered hers. Always. With a sharp kick, the horse lunged forward, bursting from the overhang in a spray of rock and dust. Gunfire exploded around them, men shouting, dogs baying. Clara ducked low, pressing against Dakota's back as the horse carried them into the trees. Bullets chased them, but the forest swallowed sound, branches whipping past. The ground thundering beneath hooves. They did not look back, for Clara knew this was more than escape, it was a vow made real. Carved in fire and blood, as long as he breathed, as long as she held on, they would face the world together.